Hundreds are dead and thousands injured following the horrific Hamas attack against Israel. But the conflict today, as we know, it's been stirring for years.
Yeah, so let's go off the ball once more to understand the history and how this started, some of the background between the state of Israel, Palestinians, and how it erupted over this past weekend. In fact, while we come at this very humbly, it's complex and there are different sets of facts. We think a little bit of historical context can help us understand what's going on in Israel.
Yeah, you could spend a whole semester at a graduate seminar course attempting to break all this down and understand it. We're going to do it for you in 5 minutes as best we can. So the area known as Israel now was controlled by the Ottoman Empire for 400 years, hundreds of years. It was a part of that sprawling empire. Of course, the Ottoman Empire joined with the Germans in World War I, and that led to its downfall.
That really solidified its downfall. It had begun to fall apart prior to World War I, but the Ottoman Empire was huge and established stability across the entire region from Africa down through the Middle East, Turkey, and into Europe. But as Pete pointed out, following World War I, the stability that was provided by the Ottoman Empire disintegrated.
And it was replaced by a different form of stability in the British Mandate. So the British government showed interest in establishing a Jewish state. There was an agreement called the Balfour Declaration in 1917, which eventually led to the British Mandate, where there was flourishing and coalescing. You look at images of Jerusalem and Israel back then, but there was still a lot of conflict, just like when the Romans were there in the biblical era. The Jewish people wanted their own state. Well,
speaking of the biblical era, this entire region had largely been tribal. It didn't resemble anything we think of in the modern mind as the nation state. But following World War I, Britain, through the League of Nations, was given control of the area, and they began to carve up the map. They begin to create Jordan and Syria and the modern conception of the nation state.
I can't remember the name of the agreement, but a lot of the consternation across the Middle East goes back to Winston Churchill and others who drew a lot of straight lines across previous tribal areas, which led to nation states that have different groups of, I think of Iraq, with different groups of people. You certainly see that in Israel. Now, there was a very tumultuous period in Europe between 1922 and 1947. A lot of anti-Semitism, regimes predicated on the destruction of the Jewish people, most significantly Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime, which in the Holocaust that led to the death of 6 million Jews. A lot of Jews left Europe and came back to Israel.
And of course, Jews leave Europe, head back to Israel. There's already Palestinians living in Israel, and thus begins your tensions. Let's focus in on the geography. Pete's done a great job this morning going to the maps and explaining the current environment. But this is a little bit of a scope out, but still focusing on Israel. Israel, roughly the size of New Jersey. Two largely Palestinian areas west, the West Bank, along the West Bank of the Jordan River, and the Gaza Strip, where our focus is this morning and throughout this latest incident.
And a lot of focus of the past has been the so-called West Bank. Others will call it Judea and Samaria, the historic homeland of the Jewish people as well. So words are a big part of this complication inside that as well. So we've talked about the Gaza Strip a lot. Small area, lots of people. You look at the West Bank, just to give you a sense, this is where Jerusalem is. And so you've got West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem, and a lot of the religious sites were captured in 1967, which we'll get to. But when you think of the West Bank, there's a lot of sites in this location of significance to Jews and Christians. You've got the traditional baptismal site of Jesus along the Jordan River. You've got the walls of Jericho that are there. You've got Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus. So a lot of significance in the Judea and Samaria.
A good comparison people are making for the West Bank to conceptualize geographically is Delaware. With a third of the population, roughly the same geographic size. But really quickly, just to put that in context, look how small Gaza Strip is, where our focus is today. 140 square miles, 2 million population.
Yeah, compare the sizes and the populations are pretty similar. It's extremely dense.
The complexity only gets worse in terms of the tensions over the past 75 years in the existence of Israel. Israel, as we point out, as Jews begin to remigrate back to Israel, 1947 is a marking point after World War II, where there's the first attempt, and ultimately is successful in creating the state of Israel.
And then ultimately, soon thereafter, there was a war, the Arab-Israeli war, where effectively you see Egypt, you see Jordan, they all coalesce on saying, no, we don't want Jews at a state of Israel here. Jordan being very significant. Jordan moved all the way up to Jerusalem and controlled much of that until 1967. So it was disputed from the very beginning and has been fought over in the modern sense of the nation state since 1947. The U.S., by the way, the first country to recognize Israel, 11 minutes into their existence, Harry Truman did so.
That war, which followed the declaration, essentially establishes the state of Israel in 1948. And then, Pete, as we pointed out, wars throughout time, but with largely state actors. We're talking about Jordan, we're talking about Egypt, we're talking about Syria, that have flashed up since the 40s in two main points. The 1967 Six-Day War was one of those, and in fact is one of those that many people are pointing back to today as a marking point of how extreme what we're watching take place today is.
It was a really, really big one because the state of Israel, a lot of people thought, okay, its enemies wanted to wipe it off its map. Instead, it went on a counteroffensive and captured Gaza, captured Judea and Samaria in the West Bank, captured the Golan Heights in the north, captured East Jerusalem, where they were on the Temple Mount and quickly gave it back. But ultimately, that redrew the lines and it allowed Israel the opportunity to effectively control these areas for their own security, something that changed in 2005 and is pertinent to our discussion when they gave the Gaza Strip over to the Palestinian Authority.
So you brought this up earlier this morning. You talked about Bibi Netanyahu immediately said, this is war. That war word had specific meaning, not an operation, specifically a war. Why? Because it's 50 years since a war. 1973, the Yom Kippur War, is the last time that type of language, that type of mindset approach has really defined the Palestinian and Israeli confrontation. But after seeing 600, we're right now, by the way, at 600 civilian children, women, grandmothers dead, and this has been declared war.
And this basically settled the nation-state aspect of this. And after that, you saw intifadas or uprisings led by the PLO, led by Hamas, led by terrorist organizations, trying to achieve their goals inside their regions. You saw buses blowing up inside, and that's why you saw border fences put up across Jerusalem and in Gaza, and operations that led to deaths of Israelis and Palestinians.
And that brings us to today, everyone talking about not just the horrific nature of it, but the historical nature of this conflict in time between these two.
Absolutely.
And what it could mean for the future.